Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another show of The Democratic View. This show is dedicated to presenting to you the candidates of the Democratic Party for this coming election. I might add also the Working Party has the endorsement of all of our candidates as well. I would like to introduce to you people who you may have seen before, but they're going to talk a little bit more about issues this time. And to my right is Zack Cohen, our representative for our candidate for Supervisor, and Sylvia Overby, and Peter VanScoyoc for council people. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on the show,
Phyllis.
Nice to see you again. You know, we have just been through a period in our government where we saw an awful lot of stuff going on, and I think I would like to go back a little bit to what you were talking about on our last interview, how to keep a government running efficiently so that it will do the job that it's supposed to do.
Well, thank you, Phyllis. And I need to thank a lot of people who have responded, who saw the show, and we did a press conference on topic of professional management. It's been very encouraging. As I expected, people who are professionals themselves understand completely. What was encouraging is how many people who say are just small business owners who are really surprised that the town doesn't have professionally qualified individuals running some of the most important departments, and looked at me like, gee, I use a CPA and I just have a small contracting company. So it's been very encouraging. There have been a few comments about paying for it, and generally I've been able to convince people that in the long term we're actually going to save money and operate much more efficiently. So it was a very successful press release, press conference.
And I know the League of Women Voters have also endorsed that point of view.
Yes, numerous people have, actually. So it's in a number of individuals that I've spoken to in prominent business committees have also endorsed it. And I believe the Budget, Finance, and Advisory Committee was their #1 recommendation last year.
And we also want to hit some of the other things that you guys have been talking about. For instance, I know we're talking about the farms and how they are using their land. And why don't you tell us about that, Sylvia?
Well, we want to help with temporary structures on farmland instead of having them go through a full site plan review. Depending on the size of the temporary structure, mostly they're called hoop houses or high tunnels. This is for food crops only, so we can really help the local food crops. And we want them to stay in East Hampton. We want the trucking not to be, some of our farm stands going far away. We want them to come and be able to grow their own food here, which is really the point of saving the farmland. So,
you know, I don't want to appear to be dumb, but would you just tell us a little bit more what a hoop house is?
You've seen them. They're those structures that are made out of plastic, and they kind of have a nice shape to them. That's just a rounded shape, and they're covered in plastic. There's no permanent floor. Sometimes it's either the dirt that's the floor, or they can put plastic.
So it's like a
over
temporary greenhouse.
It's a temporary greenhouse, and they're generally not super high. I guess they can get 10 feet.
10 to 14 feet, depending on the width.
Yeah. So,
and they're used, let's say, to start the seedlings and things like that.
Exactly. It's a way that local farmers can extend their season on both ends. They can start the crops earlier indoors. It cuts down on the need for pesticides and herbicides by planting crops indoors. And it also, during the colder months, allows them to continue growing. Because on Long Island, we do have a relatively short growing season. The other aspect of what we're proposing with farm legislation is a model that is a tiered system, whereas the review is basically commensurate with whatever is being proposed. In other words, if it's a highly intensive use, it will get a higher level of review. If it's a simple addition to a commercial site plan, or in this case, a farm hoop house, then it will be an expedited review. And in many cases, we feel that we can tailor the law such that the review can take place administratively at much less expense and time by both the applicants and town employees.
And the administrative would be through the planning department, which is the land use agency that we need to be going through. And I think, and all of our proposals would still be, the public would be informed. There would be, some would have public hearings and others would not. If there's just no, comment about it, these hoop houses can be very, on a big piece of property, they wouldn't be seen. Mm-hmm. So it may also help with keeping deer fencing at a minimum, because if they're inside the hoop houses, then there's no need for some deer fencing.
Actually, we do the same thing in my house. We cover some of our gardens.
I want to mention, because the Sylvia and Peter may be too modest to mention, that the two of them combined have about 18 years of experience serving on the zoning board, serving on the planning board. Sylvia's been chair of the planning board. Peter's been chair of the zoning board. And it was such a pleasure for me to work with them on this, where they could take the lead. And I felt a student. Hopefully I asked thoughtful questions and we moved things along. But I think it's one of the things that differentiates the three of us in our slate this year of how much experience we will bring in. And I think that it will show in the crafting of laws. Even this case, with all their experience, we contacted 4 farmers and got their input. I contacted 2 land planning attorneys to get their input. And this is just for a draft proposal. So I think between our methods of detail and investigation and the knowledge we bring in, it's going to show in a very well thought through legislation that really represents all sides.
I have got quite a smile on my face because I have watched our present town board operate through the seat of their pants.
Well.
And everything they do, it's like, oh, wait a minute, we didn't think about this one yet, about this little problem. Like when they stopped with the LEAF program, they hadn't decided what they were going to do about people coming in and bringing all of their leaves to the dump.
Well, public discourse is really an important issue, and that is open government, and that's the definition of open government, to make sure that every point of view is heard, discussed, thought about, and not dismissed out of hand. So, and I think that we would bring that. Certainly, we've been on boards. Zack has been head of Nature Preserve and has had to listen to all different sides of very complicated issues with hunting and so he's taken all those points of view and looked at them and come up with a balance, and that's really what I think this slate brings, is a really good balance.
I think the other thing that really all three of us are very concerned with is the process itself, that the process be designed and followed in such a way that all applicants are treated equally.
Yes.
That no special methods of getting things done. We're more concerned with the process and the integrity of the process rather than necessarily the outcome, rather than the other way around.
And a little fairness is always a very helpful thing.
Is very important.
Fairness and a level playing field. If the public doesn't support what you're doing, then, and the reason is because they feel someone is getting special treatment over somebody else, and then there's no level playing field, and there's no reason to trust government. So we need to be trusted in the jobs that we do, and the way to do that is, again, to make sure that everybody is listened to and everyone is treated exactly the same, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of where they live in the town, but that they all come on an equal footing. And that is not what we've been seeing.
And that sounds very refreshing. And I certainly hope that that will happen when you guys get in, because that is wonderful. We have seen an awful lot of harsh dialogue going on at some of our town board meetings. And I want to hit on another point you were talking about when the planning process, and that is maintaining our quality of life. We have such an unusually magnificent place that we live. I'd like you to talk about how we going to do that? How are we going to keep this place as pristine and as lovely as it is, yet allow people to earn livings?
Well, that really is a major reason why we have planning and zoning, is to protect quality of life and to balance the needs of different user groups and neighborhoods versus business. And we have a number of rules and regulations that are tailored to do that, and it's important that we see that there's compliance. And there are areas in which we can improve the process, that we can make it less onerous, but everybody should be playing by the same rules.
Well, I'm going to jump from that into a more controversial topic of, say, quality of life. I'm very distressed about what's happening in Montauk now. I like to think of Montauk as a family town where other people can come out and have a little fun, but it's really being, I think the laws and the planning and building laws are being taken advantage of by individuals, and I don't think we're seeing a level playing field. There's huge violations at some of these new motel, hotels, clubs, where they're operating without having gone through planning processes and without having building permits for some of their operations. And I'm very distressed that it doesn't seem to be the enforcement is responding adequately to the level of the problem. And of course, it's even more distressing to me to hear a supervisor say, oh, just be patient, the summer's almost over, to somebody who may just be out here in their house for the summer. And I don't consider that an adequate response. And it does relate back to the planning and the zoning and the whole process following through. And part of that, though, is that you want to create a very fair process, but then you also have to enforce correctly against those who don't follow the process. And I think this is very distressing, what's happening in Montauk.
Yeah, well, we all know that this has been, I mean, if you're not sleeping at night because of the noise that's coming down the street and the cars and what's going on, that summer's almost over is simply not an adequate answer to those kinds of problems.
It's not a good answer. It's an answer, but it's not a really good one, particularly for people that live in the neighborhood. Some of the restaurants are pre-existing non-conforming, and so they are allowed to exist as a restaurant, but when you expand that use to be outside activities, that is part of the code, and that is in their certificate of occupancy, and they're not following that. So they need to make sure that they follow, as again, that level playing field. Everybody is treated the same, and code enforcement needs to be doing the same thing. It's making sure that they're cited and that it comes to a conclusion and not just out there until the end of the season.
Yes, well, I mean, it's only in midway in the summer as we are taping right now. So, I mean, I don't know when this show will air, but right now it's midway. It's August 1st, so, that's a whole month of your nerves being shattered by so much going on. Actually, we wanted to take my grandchildren up to the lighthouse, and we all said, no, you got to avoid Montauk now. And that's a terrible thing.
That is a terrible thing, because it is a very family-friendly place. Fishing is great. I remember my kids would go out on the, is it Lazy Bones?
Yeah.
Fishing?
Lazy
They'd go
Bones,
out Lazy
right.
Bones fishing, and it was such a good experience for them, and it was as close as they're going to get because their mother and father don't fish. So it was as close as they were going to get, and people need to take advantage of those opportunities. There's the ferry to go to Block Island. There's things for lots of family activities to do, and to say I'm not going to go there because other people are making it difficult. That's not a good thing.